Migrants seeking asylum continue to pour into Illinois by the busload. None have come to McLean County, and one government official wants to make sure they don't.
American dollars should be used for American citizens.
That's coming up on WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm Eric Stock, in for John Norton. On today's show, McLean County government considers a plan to ban funding for migrant services. Immigration advocates decry the move.
We should feel an obligation as a community to assist people in that situation.
And emergency managers are trying to figure out what would happen if a busload pulled up in McLean County with nowhere else to go.
We just can't plan for every single what and if ahead of time.
That's coming up after a Bloomington Normal News update. This is Sound Ideas on 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.
Support for WGLT comes from Bloomington Normal Audiology. Hear My Story continues with local patient Paul Brandt.
So I just went without them for all those years. I talked to somebody who had recently gotten hearing aids and talked about the fact that they were connected to the TV. And so that kind of prompted me to try it again.
Paul's full story can be found at bnaudiology.com.
From the campus of Illinois State University, this is WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm Eric Stock. Migrants have been pouring into Illinois by the thousands, by bus and by plane, ever since Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott started to send the asylum seekers north to Chicago and other Democrat-led cities late last year. Since Chicago started to place restrictions on when migrants can be dropped off, some buses have ended up in suburban cities seeking refuge. Some suburban communities and at least one county in northern Illinois have considered their own restrictions. Grundy County, which is about an hour northeast of Bloomington Normal, declared itself a non-sanctuary county last month. It posted signs on Interstate 55 warning drivers of migrant buses not to stop in their communities. Their signs were later removed. Tomorrow night, the McLean County Board could add its name to the list of communities that considers itself off limits to the migrant population. One county board member has proposed a ban on any funding for any services for migrants. The resolution is scheduled for a vote, and it's touched off a heated debate. Tonight, we'll hear from the author of that plan. We'll also hear from an advocacy group that considers the plan offensive. And we'll hear from an emergency manager in McLean County on what they plan to do if the county were to end up with an influx of migrants. We begin with the McLean County board member Chuck Erickson. The Republican from Bloomington proposed the resolution for the county to refuse to fund services for any migrants sent to McLean County by another state or municipality. The measure says, quote, the federal government's refusal to enforce immigration laws empowers drug cartels and victimizes women and children and often results in the exploitation of migrants, many of which have not filed asylum applications and are currently unaccounted for, unquote. Erickson, who is also running in an Illinois House primary in a deeply conservative district, says his county resolution is about the rule of law.
Right now, down in Texas and Arizona and other states on the border, it is our view that a lot of people that are coming across the border, we don't know who they are. I mean, you can sit there and say they're people seeking political asylum, but do you know that for a fact? I mean, not everybody is seeking political asylum. And we're going to have to close that border and try to figure out who are we letting in and who are we not letting in? I mean, we've got to be prudent about this. I look at it the same as being your own house. You just wouldn't let anybody into your home that you didn't know who they were. I mean, you can sit there and say, I want to be the most compassionate person in the world. Okay, but would you let that person in your home? Well, not till I knew something about them. Well, it's the same thing here. You've got to have a better idea of who you're letting in, or it could create additional problems in the future.
How does this pertain to McLean County government then?
Well, I mean, the county government, we don't know what's going to happen when they bring in the, if a bus is coming up from, let's say, Texas, okay? If they're going to stop here, we want them to move on up to a full sanctuary city, like Chicago or some other place, but we don't feel that our taxpayer dollars should be used to help all that, because we just feel that American dollars should be used for American citizens. And when I pay taxes, I pay it for Americans. I don't pay it to help everybody out. I pay it to help some people out, but I can't do everything. And the tax burden this is going to create in this country, or even in this county, if we let it go unfettered, is going to be too big. I mean, you see down there in Texas, what they're doing is they're actually trying to move them out because they can't. I mean, it's almost a humanitarian thing. We can't handle them all, okay? If you want them here, you're going to have to take some of the burden too.
So when you say we and our and all that, who are you referring to besides yourself?
Well, I'm referring to other people in McLean County. I mean, I don't stand alone on this resolution. There's other people that wanted me to bring it. There's a lot of people that feel strongly. Let's just put it this way. This is not the only county that's passing resolutions, okay? There are other places in the state that are doing the same thing. I mean, they passed a huge resolution up there in Grundy County about this. They're just basically telling the buses, go on past us, okay? You know, and so my view is that McLean County, if Chicago wants to be a sanctuary city, then Chicago should actually be the sanctuary city that it claims to be, and you can have them, okay? It's not because we're anti-immigrant. It's not because we don't like people. It's not because we don't love our fellow human being. But this should never have been allowed in this country to where our border just became that porous and that open. It's unsafe for us, and we can't afford it.
So if it's not a busload of migrants, or if it's individuals who come in and are seeking county services, like the health department, or perhaps they go to the triage center that's county funded, what about those kinds of things at a more granular level?
Well, I mean, at some point you got to move them along, okay? I mean, I suppose if someone came in there and they're bleeding to death, you know, the county's going to try to make sure they get their hospital needs met, but we can't meet we can't. But that's an extreme example. I mean, that's one in, you know, hundreds that might have that issue. The rest of them, we cannot afford to keep them here. We just can't do it.
Have you talked to the sheriff about this, and what does he think?
I have not talked to the sheriff about this, but I know that the sheriff has been in consultation. All I know is what the sheriff has told me. I don't know what the exact protocol is going to be, but I'm sure the sheriff is in consultation with the city chief and the town of Normal chief, and they're trying to figure out what do we do if they stop here. What's the plan, okay? And you would have to ask them what the plan is, not me. I don't know exactly what the plan is. My view of the plan is that, listen, as soon as you can, you get them on a bus and you get them up to Chicago.
So if it's the county speaking for Bloomington and Normal, I expect that the Twin Cities might have a different view about that, and this would be the county sort of speaking for both of those, unless there's buy-in.
The county has representatives from Bloomington and Normal, okay? So, and the county does, I mean, the county isn't the little child of the city of Bloomington or the little child of the town of Normal. We represent the entire county, okay? And the county has a right to have a say-so in this. And, you know, if it's really just talking about county funds, then that's what it is.
Can you get 11 votes on the county board with the split as it exists? And do you know of other board members who are for sure on board?
I do know that there are some other board members on board. I don't know that we're going to get to 11 votes. But to me, it's the importance of bringing the issue out and addressing it, you know, is important, even if we can't necessarily pass it, because I think it's an issue that we have to address. I mean, you can't act like it doesn't exist.
Are you expecting pushback from groups that are going to say that this may be anti-immigrant?
I've been getting pushed back all my life, okay? I mean, I'm used to being pushed back, okay? But I'm also used to fighting for what I believe in. And I'm used to being criticized, and I'm used to taking stands where I think a stand needs to be taken.
The pushback against Chuck Erickson's resolution came swiftly from multiple organizations. We'll have more on that in a moment. This is WGLT's Sound Ideas. This is Sound Ideas. I'm Eric Stock. We continue with reaction to a McLean County board proposal to deny funding for migrant services. The Bloomington Normal chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union said it's, quote, sad to see an elected official turning their back on the American value of welcoming newcomers and asylum seekers to our country. The McLean County League of Women Voters urged the public to call their county board members and tell them to vote against the resolution. Fellow McLean County board member Corey Byrne of Bloomington, a Democrat, said on social media the proposal uses, quote, racist tropes and hysterical fear-mongering to deny taxpayer funding to migrants. Byrne also called Erickson the county board's resident culture warrior and champion of systemic racism. Not in Our Town of Bloomington Normal released a statement saying that immigration is a fundamental American experience that has historically enriched our community. The anti-discrimination group says, quote, rather than label or restrict those that come our way, our challenge is how do we ensure that they are received, particularly in an emergency situation, with food, shelter, and a caring heart. Not in Our Town co-chair Mike Matiga says the county resolution reeks of political opportunism.
This is a federal issue, and to somehow isolate McLean County and claim that we are not going to governmentally assist people who happen to get off buses here is, to me, just number one, we should feel an obligation as a community to assist people in that situation. They are, in many ways, helpless pawns in this whole immigration situation, and that to presume that somehow somebody's left at a bus stop and said, good luck, find your way, that McLean County says, well, we're not going to help you, is totally inappropriate, and I think a stigmatization of a group that's being victimized for political gain.
Pawns in terms of the fact that Texas's governor basically sent them up here to offload what he perceived as his problem?
Yes, and I think if the McLean County Board wants to send a statement to Governor Abbott in Texas. Besides the mayor of Chicago, maybe Republicans in McLean County might have a little more stroke talking to Governor Abbott than Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago might have. And if they're upset that people are being used in this way, then please speak up about that. But to say we're going to refuse assistance to people in a dire situation, to me, is an inappropriate response.
They would say that the problem begins at the border, that the federal government is not doing enough to secure the border and to prevent this rush of migrants coming across, that they are not able to contain, to track, to vet in any way. And they frame this as a potential safety risk that you don't know how many of them could potentially mean harm.
I would say the border issue definitely needs attention, and it needs bipartisan attention. It should not be used as a standoff point between the Democratic and Republican parties in Washington, D.C. If you remember, it was over 10 years ago we had our own Senator Durbin was part of what was called the Gang of Eight in the U.S. Senate, who came up with some solutions for immigration and could not get a response in what was then the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. So, yes, speak up on that issue. Call your congresspeople, call your senators, and say, we need a valid solution here that recognizes human rights, but also recognizes the right of this country to control its borders and who comes in. And that's something that is a very complicated ball of wax that a resolution from McLean County Board is not going to solve. It needs a federal solution, and people should be speaking up about this issue federally, not just simply passing a resolution to try to score points locally and politically.
What about the concern that the financial burden that this would place on the community would be overly burdensome and there isn't anything in place to help them?
part of that resolution is, yes, we should have a plan if this should happen. And again, it's not like a bus has stopped here and dropped people off. And that needs to be a combination of local government and private charities, not private charities, charities in town working together on this. And as this resolution says, we're going to refuse aid to assist people. This should be an opportunity to say, let's be prepared in case this should happen. Let's have government, let's have charity working together so we don't have people wandering the streets in the winter trying to gain assistance. So to say we're going to refuse aid from the state of Illinois or the federal government does not help the situation if we have people left here off a bus or off a train.
To drill down on how to provide help if that were to happen where there is a busload that is brought here and they would need care, you're talking about having a solution that involves multiple parties. We do have a housing shortage here, a pretty substantial one. Nonprofits are, in many cases, challenged and hard-pressed to provide for the folks who are already here. Is there really a solution out there that's workable that would not involve significant reinvestment of dollars from city or county governments?
Yeah, housing is the challenge. I mean, it's a challenge for people who are working for a living, let alone for our own homeless community that's out there. So I think that is going to be the biggest roadblock, is going to be housing issues. I think finding food, finding clothing for people, those things could happen very easily through local charities and through some governmental assistance. But housing is going to be that one roadblock that I think is going to require some very creative solutions.
That was Mike Matika with Not in Our Town, Bloomington Normal, and we will discuss possible solutions next on Sound Ideas. As we continue on WGLT's news magazine Sound Ideas, the question of how the Bloomington Normal community could provide services to the asylum seekers is one that a committee of government and social service leaders is trying to address. Town of Normal Mayor Chris Koo said back in 2022 the town was exploring what it would do if a bus of migrants arrived, but added the town would need to be realistic about what it would be able to do, citing the community's housing shortage. In recent months, the McLean County Emergency Management Agency has headed up discussions about a potential migrant influx. Kathy Beck is the agency's director.
One of the things that EMA does is make plans. So we are following everything else that's going on across the country and in the state and seeing that other communities are getting buses or planes or trains. So it's time to plan to be ready in case we do get some. Probably been planning for a couple of months.
And who all has been involved in those discussions?
We've worked with different police departments, fire departments, administration offices, social service agencies. We try to do it as a whole, all hands-on approach.
In Bloomington Normal, city governments as well, or those beyond the Twin Cities?
The entire county. We try to bring everybody in, and we have no way of knowing if we get a bus, when we'd get a bus, and where we'd get a bus.
What is the stated objective for this group that's been meeting? What are you looking to solve?
We are following the state guidelines, and the biggest goal out of this is to be able to get the immigrants up to an intake center where they can get the services that they need.
What all services would be offered there?
They do health screenings, would work with people with housing, with immigration issues, and provide basic life support things.
What kind of long-term help would be available to them there?
I can't answer for what they're doing up there. I plan for down here and how we can get them where we need to get them.
So as far as the municipalities of Bloomington Normal, there's been talk about housing and them needing to be housed here potentially. You don't anticipate that as being an issue?
Housing in our communities is an issue all the time. We have the homeless population here, and we need to help them. And if we do get a bus full of people and we can't turn them up to Chicago immediately, we'll do what we can to get them something so that they're safe until we can get them to where they need to go.
What role, if any, would the social services agencies that have been involved in these discussions, human service organizations, what role would they have in this potentially?
If we get people and if we need to keep them for overnight or something because of not being able to get the transportation right then and there due to weather or whatever else, we would look to those social service agencies to assist with food and basic life things. Housing, again, is going to be an issue.
How would that potentially play out? What could be made available, if anything?
That's a gap that we have right now. Again, we have all these homeless people that don't have anywhere to go, so finding places for other people who would be defined as homeless is going to be a problem.
Any role that McLean County EMA would be able to play in that?
We'd work with all of the partners that we have, and we've got partners across the entire county trying to find somewhere that we could, put people for overnight or hopefully just an overnight. But we would kind of lead that charge and put all those pieces together. That's why we have an emergency operations center, so we can all come together and discuss and plan and figure everything out.
I imagine as far as the migrant population goes, they're not going to be here for an overnight stay, right? There would likely be a need for some long-term housing.
There could be, but I mean, there's a whole bunch of what's and ifs, and we just can't plan for every single what and if ahead of time. It's gonna have to be something that we do when it happens.
That was Kathy Beck with the McLean County Emergency Management Agency. She would not comment on the county board proposal to ban funding for migrants, but she said it would be a life safety issue if the community was unable to provide housing for those who need it. The Illinois Department of Human Services recently opened the intake center in Chicago to process migrants and help them get to a final destination. That could mean family or friends or to a shelter. Migrants have already been staying at the intake center for weeks. Hundreds are sleeping in buses at the site. The state is also putting up heated tents next door. The tents are expected to be ready by the end of January. WBEZ reports the tents will be used for social services, not housing. Tomorrow on Sound Ideas, the Immigration Project, based in Normal, has been involved in talks with the government leaders in McLean County on how to prepare for migrant arrivals, and it's been offering legal assistance for Illinois' newcomers. We'll hear from the Immigration Project on tomorrow's show. The McLean County Board is scheduled to vote on the resolution tomorrow night. We will have a full recap at WGLT.org after the meeting and on Morning Edition Friday. Thanks for choosing WGLT's Sound Ideas, made possible in part by Bloomington Normal Audiology. I'm Eric Stock. Ryan Toohey edits the show. This is 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.